Elena Cortez's calloused hands trembled as she pressed the blood-soaked cloth against the stranger's shoulder, his golden eyes flickering open in the candlelight of her humble cottage. Outside, thunder crashed over the village of San Miguel, while inside, the wounded man's fevered whispers spoke of crown jewels and royal betrayals that made no sense to a blacksmith's daughter. When he grasped her wrist with surprising strength and begged her to flee with him before dawn, Elena faced an impossible choice: trust a delirious stranger who might be mad, or ignore the way her heart raced when those piercing eyes met hers. What she couldn't know was that across the kingdom, search parties bore torches through the storm, hunting for their missing king, whose survival now depended on a village girl who had never ventured beyond the mountains that cradled her world. The storm struck San Miguel without warning, transforming the quiet mountain village into a battlefield of wind and rain. Elena Cortez pressed her face against the cottage window, watching tree branches whip like demon arms against the darkening sky. Lightning split the heavens, illuminating her father's blacksmith forge across the muddy courtyard where sparks from his evening fire danced wildly in the gale. "Close the shutters, child," called Abuela Carmen from her rocking chair by the hearth. "Storms like this bring more than rain." Elena latched the wooden shutters, just as a tremendous crash echoed from the forest beyond their cottage. Not thunder, something else, something that made the hair on her arms rise despite the warm room. "Did you hear that, Abuela?" The old woman's weathered hands stilled on her embroidery. "Trouble finds us all eventually, Mija. Sometimes it falls from the sky." Another crash, closer this time. Through the crack in the shutters, Elena glimpsed a flash of movement in the trees. A horse, riderless and wild-eyed, galloped past their gate before disappearing into the storm. "Someone's out there," Elena breathed, already reaching for her woolen cloak. "Elena, no." Abuela Carmen's voice cracked like a whip. "Stay inside. Let your father." But Elena was already at the door. At 19, she possessed her mother's stubborn heart and her father's fearless spirit, a dangerous combination that had gotten her into trouble more times than she could count. The storm hit her like a physical blow. Rain lashed her face as she stumbled across the courtyard, calling out into the darkness. "Hello? Is someone hurt?" Lightning illuminated the scene. A figure collapsed beneath the old oak tree, motionless in the mud and leaves. Elena's heart hammered as she ran toward him, her boots slipping on wet stone. The man lay on his side, dark hair plastered to his skull, expensive clothing torn and bloodied. Not a villager, his fine boots and embroidered vest marked him as nobility. Though what noble would be traveling alone through these mountains during such weather? "Sir, can you hear me?" Elena knelt beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly over his still form. Blood seeped from a wound on his shoulder, mixing with the rain. His eyes snapped open, startling gold in the lightning's glare. "Don't touch me," he gasped, trying to push himself upright. "Dangerous. They're coming." "You're hurt," Elena said, ignoring his protest as she helped him sit. "Let me help you." "No." His grip on her wrist was surprisingly strong despite his injuries. "You don't understand. I'm not." Elena made her decision. Wrapping his arm around her shoulders, she half carried, half dragged him toward the cottage. He was heavier than he looked, all lean muscle beneath the torn fabric, but desperation gave her strength. "Abuela," she called as she kicked open the door. "Bring water and clean cloth." The old woman took one look at the stranger and crossed herself. "Ay, Dios mío, what have you done, child?" "He's bleeding." Elena maneuvered him toward the narrow bed in the corner where she usually slept. "Help me get him onto the bed." Together they managed to settle him on the straw mattress. In the candlelight, Elena could see the full extent of his injuries. A shoulder wound, certainly, but also cuts along his ribs and a nasty gash on his temple that explained his confusion. "His clothes," Abuela Carmen whispered, fingering the fine embroidery on his vest. "This is silk, child, and look." She pointed to a ring on his finger, heavy gold set with stones that caught the firelight. "Whoever he is, he's not from San Miguel." Elena was already cutting away his bloodied shirt, revealing the full extent of his wounds. "Sword cuts," she murmured, having seen enough injuries in her father's forge to recognize the patterns. Someone attacked him. The stranger's eyes fluttered open again, fixing on her face with startling intensity. "You shouldn't have helped me," he whispered. "When they find me here, your family." "Who's looking for you?" Elena pressed a clean cloth against his shoulder wound. "Who did this?" "My brother," he said. Then his eyes rolled back as unconsciousness claimed him. Elena worked through the night, cleaning wounds and stitching cuts while the storm raged outside. The stranger drifted in and out of fever, sometimes lucid enough to warn her again about danger, sometimes rambling about crowns and thrones and betrayals that made no sense. "The royal seal," he mumbled during one particularly violent bout of fever. "Hidden in the saddle. Prove my identity. Tell them Adrian lives." "Hush," Elena soothed, pressing a cool cloth to his burning forehead. "You're safe here." But even as she spoke the words, unease twisted in her stomach. Noble or not, This man carried the scent of violence and political intrigue that had no place in their simple mountain village. As dawn approached, the stranger's fever finally broke. Elena dozed in her chair beside the bed, exhaustion weighing her eyelids, when his voice brought her fully awake. "You saved my life." She turned to find him watching her, those golden eyes now clear and focused. In the morning light filtering through the shutters, she could see him properly for the first time. Strong jaw darkened with stubble, aristocratic features that spoke of good breeding, and an air of command that seemed natural despite his weakened state. Anyone would have done the same, Elena said, though they both knew it wasn't true. He struggled to sit up, wincing at the movement. "What's your name?" "Elena Cortez." "And you are?" He hesitated, conflict flickering across his face. "Adrian," he said finally. "Just Adrian." "Well, just Adrian," Elena said with gentle mockery. "You need rest. Those wounds—" "No." His urgency startled her. "I can't stay. They'll search every village, every cottage, when they find me here." "Who will find you?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Men who want me dead. Men who believe they've already succeeded." Before Elena could respond, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from outside. Multiple horses, moving fast despite the muddy roads. Adrian went rigid, his hand instinctively reaching for a sword that wasn't there. "Hide," he hissed. "Tell them you've seen no one." But Elena was already moving to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. 6 men in dark cloaks sat on horseback in her courtyard, their leader dismounting with predatory grace. "Royal Guard," Adrian breathed behind her, and something in his voice made her blood run cold. The leader pounded on their door with the pommel of his sword. "Open, by order of King Marcos." Elena's world tilted. King Marcos, the realm's new ruler, who had claimed the throne just weeks ago, after his brother's mysterious death during a hunting expedition. The entire kingdom mourned their beloved Prince Adrian, heir to the throne, whose body had never been found. She turned to look at the wounded man in her bed, understanding crashing over her like a physical blow. The fine clothes, the air of command, the way he'd spoken of crowns and betrayals. "You're him," she whispered. "You're Prince Adrian." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw the weight of a crown he'd never expected to wear, the burden of a kingdom stolen from beneath him. "I was," he said quietly. "Now I'm just a dead man who refuses to lie down." The pounding on the door grew more insistent. "Open, or we'll break it down." Elena's mind raced. The rightful king of Valdris lay wounded in her bed while his brother's men searched for him with swords drawn. Whatever choice she made in the next few seconds would change everything for Adrian, for herself, for the entire kingdom. She looked at this man who had trusted her with his life, this prince who had spoken her name like a prayer in his delirium. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked to the door. "Coming," she called, buying precious seconds as she glanced back at Adrian one final time. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read: hope, resignation, and something else, something that made her heart skip despite the danger pressing against their door. Elena lifted the wooden bar and opened the door to face the king's guards, knowing that whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The captain of the guard filled Elena's doorway like a threat made flesh. Scarred face, cold eyes, and a hand that rested too casually on his sword hilt. Behind him, 5 mounted soldiers formed a semicircle in her courtyard, blocking any escape. "Captain Vega," he introduced himself without warmth. "We're searching for a dangerous criminal, a man wounded in last night's storm." Elena forced herself to meet his stare. "I've seen no one, Captain. The storm kept us all inside." "Is that so?" Vega stepped uninvited into her cottage, his gaze sweeping the single room. Elena's heart hammered as his eyes paused on the bed where Adrian lay hidden beneath heavy blankets, perfectly still. "My grandmother," Elena said quickly, moving to block Vega's view. "She's been ill with fever, very contagious." Abuela Carmen, bless her quick wit, chose that moment to cough violently from her chair by the fire. "Ay, Elena," she wheezed. The sickness burned so hot. Vega's hand moved away from his sword, but his suspicion remained. "This criminal is extremely dangerous, a traitor to the crown. If you're harboring him," he let the threat hang unfinished. "We're loyal subjects of King Marcos," Elena lied smoothly. "Why would we risk ourselves for a traitor?" "Indeed." Vega moved toward the bed despite her protests. "Then you won't mind if I—" "Captain," one of his men called from outside. Fresh tracks leading toward the river. The fugitive went east. Elena held her breath as Vega hesitated, torn between investigating the bed and following the new lead. Finally, duty won over suspicion. "If you're lying, girl," he said, pointing a scarred finger at her face, "I'll return, and next time, I won't be so gentle." After they thundered away, Elena sagged against the closed door. Beside the bed, Adrian pushed aside the blankets, his face pale with more than just his injuries. "That was foolish," he said quietly. "Vega isn't known for mercy. If he'd found me here—" "But he didn't." Elena moved to check his bandages, needing something to do with her shaking hands. Though those tracks he found. My horse, Adrian confirmed. I sent him toward the river before I collapse. Smart animal. He's probably halfway to the border by now. Elena paused in her ministrations. The border? You were fleeing the kingdom? Pain flickered across Adrian's features. What else could I do? My own brother tried to murder me. Elena, half the court believes I'm already dead. The other half wants to make it true. But you're the rightful king, she protested. Rightful? Adrian's laugh held no humor. Marcos wears the crown. He has the army's loyalty, the nobles' support. What do I have? A claim written in blood that no one will believe? Elena studied his face, seeing the weight of betrayal there, the exhaustion of a man who had lost everything in a single night. You have the truth. Truth is a luxury kings can't always afford. Adrian's golden eyes met hers. Besides, staying would only bring death to those who help me, like you. A simple statement hung between them, heavy with implication. Elena realized she stood at a crossroads. She could tend his wounds, send him on his way, and return to her simple life, or take me with you, she said suddenly. Adrian blinked. What? You said they'll search every village. Captain Vega suspects something. He'll be back with more men, more questions. Elena's words came faster as the idea took shape. But if I disappear too, if they think I fled in fear after seeing something I shouldn't have? Elena, no. Adrian struggled to sit up. You don't understand what you're suggesting. Life as a fugitive, always running, never safe. Better than life as a corpse when Vega returns. Elena began gathering supplies with determined efficiency. Besides, you're wounded. You need someone to care for those injuries, and I doubt you'll find many volunteer healers in the wilderness. Your family will be safer without me here, Elena interrupted, glancing at Abuela Carmen, who nodded slowly from her chair. Won't you, Abuela? The old woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears. See, mija, better they think you ran from fear than discover you helped their lost king. Adrian watched Elena pack herbs and bandages into a leather satchel, conflict clear in his expression. This isn't a fairy tale, Elena. I can't promise you'll survive what's coming. Elena paused, meeting his gaze directly. In the space of a single night, this wounded stranger had brought danger to her door, secrets to her bed, and something else she couldn't name to her heart. Perhaps it was madness, but looking at him now, this rightful king reduced to hiding in a blacksmith's cottage, she knew her choice was already made. I'm not asking for promises, she said quietly. I'm asking for a chance to help you reclaim what was stolen. Why? The word was barely a whisper. Elena could have given him a dozen practical reasons. Vega's suspicions, her family's safety, her own survival. Instead, she spoke the truth that surprised even her. Because when I look at you, I see a king worth fighting for. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Surprise, gratitude, and beneath it all the first spark of hope she'd seen since he'd opened his eyes. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no turning back. Once we leave this cottage, we're committed to a path that ends with either a crown or a grave. Elena shouldered her pack and moved to help him stand. Then we'd better make sure it ends with a crown. As they prepared to slip away into the morning mist, Elena caught Abuela Carmen's hand. The old woman pressed something into her palm, a small silver medallion depicting Saint Christopher, patron of travelers. Para tu viaje, mija, she whispered. May he protect you both. Elena kissed her grandmother's weathered cheek, tasting salt tears. Then she supported Adrian's weight as they stepped into the pale dawn, leaving behind everything she'd ever known for a future written in shadow and uncertainty. Behind them, smoke still rose from the village chimneys as San Miguel awakened to an ordinary day. Ahead lay the wilderness, and beyond that, a kingdom in need of its true king. Neither Elena nor Adrian looked back. The ancient forest swallowed them like hungry mouths. Elena had never ventured this deep into the wilderness that surrounded San Miguel, where sunlight struggled through thick canopies, and every shadow might hide danger. Beside her, Adrian moved with grim determination despite his wounds, but she could see the cost in his labored breathing and the sheen of sweat on his pale face. We need to rest, she said as they reached a small clearing beside a mountain stream. Not yet. Adrian scanned the trees around them. Vega will discover our trail soon enough. We need distance. You need to live long enough to reclaim your throne, Elena countered, guiding him to a fallen log. Sit. Let me check your bandages. Adrian yielded, exhaustion overriding his urgency. As Elena unwrapped the cloth around his shoulder, she was relieved to see the bleeding had stopped, though the wound remained angry and inflamed. It needs cleaning, she murmured, gathering supplies from her pack. Elena. Adrian caught her wrist as she reached for the stream water. What I said before about this not being a fairy tale. I know what I've gotten myself into, she interrupted, though her pulse quickened at his touch. Do you? His golden eyes searched her face. Yesterday you were a village girl whose greatest worry was whether your father's forge had enough coal. Now you're a fugitive from the crown, bound to a man who might not live to see another sunrise. Elena met his gaze steadily. Yesterday I was a village girl who had never seen beyond these mountains. Today I'm traveling with the rightful king of Valdris. Which life sounds more worth living? A ghost of a smile touched Adrian's lips, spoken like a true revolutionary. As Elena cleaned his wounds, Adrian began to speak. Not the fevered ramblings of the night before, but clear, deliberate words that painted a picture of betrayal that went deeper than simple fraternal rivalry. Marcos was always ambitious, he said, wincing as she applied fresh herbs to his shoulder. But I thought blood meant something to him. When father died and I became crown prince, I made Marcos my closest advisor. I trusted him with state secrets, military plans, even the location of the royal treasury. He used that trust against you. Brilliantly. Adrian's voice carried grudging admiration. The hunting expedition was his idea, just the two of us, no guards, bonding as brothers. I was such a fool. Elena wrapped clean bandages around his torso, trying to ignore the way her fingers trembled when they brushed his skin. What happened that night? We made camp by the old watchtower. Marcos waited until I slept, then struck with a poisoned blade. Adrian's jaw tightened. I woke as he was dragging my body toward the cliff. He wanted it to look like an accident. The grieving brother would bury his sibling and claim the crown in sorrow. But you survived. Barely. I managed to fight back. But the poison, I was weak, disoriented. I fell from the cliff anyway, but into the river instead of onto the rocks. The current carried me downstream, and by some miracle I washed ashore miles from where Marcos expected to find my corpse. Elena secured the bandage with gentle efficiency. He told the kingdom you were dead. He found enough blood to make it convincing. Probably cut himself for the performance. Adrian tested the range of motion in his wounded shoulder. By the time I recovered enough to travel, his coronation was already planned. Half the noble houses had pledged their loyalty to King Marcos I, and the other half would kill me themselves rather than see the kingdom destabilized by a pretender returning from the dead. Adrian struggled to his feet. That's why we can't simply ride to the capital and demand justice. Without proof of Marcos's treachery, I'm just another ambitious noble with a convenient resemblance to the dead prince. Elena shouldered her pack, processing this new information. What kind of proof would convince them? Witnesses to his confession, documents in his own hand. The crown jewels he claimed were lost with my body. Adrian's expression grew thoughtful, or testimony from someone present during the attempt on my life. But you said it was just the two of you. I thought so, but while I was healing, I remembered something. A sound in the trees during our fight, like someone moving through the underbrush. Someone else was there that night, Elena. Someone who saw everything. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Do you know who? I have suspicions, but finding them, that will require allies, resources and time we may not have. Adrian gestured toward the forest path ahead. First, we need sanctuary. Somewhere Marcos's reach can't extend. Where? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Finally, he spoke a single name that made Elena's blood chill. Blackwood Castle. She'd heard whispers of that place, a fortress in the northern mountains, home to Lord Commander Dante Blackwood, the most feared military commander in the kingdom. Blackwood had served Adrian's father with legendary loyalty, but since the old king's death, he'd withdrawn to his stronghold and refused all contact with the new regime. You think he'll help us? Elena asked. I think he's the only man in the kingdom powerful enough to challenge Marcos directly. Adrian began walking again, his pace more steady now. But reaching him, that's another matter entirely. How far? 3 days through the Thornwood Forest, if we avoid the main roads. Longer if we encounter Marcos's patrols. Adrian glanced at her sideways. It won't be easy, Elena. The Thornwood is dangerous even for experienced travelers. Elena thought of her simple cottage, her predictable life, the safety she'd abandoned to follow this wounded prince into the wilderness. Then she looked at Adrian, really looked at him, and saw not just a man running for his life, but a king fighting for his people's future. Then we'd better get moving, she said simply. They walked in companionable silence for hours, following deer trails and mountain streams deeper into territory that appeared on no map. Elena found herself studying Adrian when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the way he moved despite his injuries, alert, purposeful, every gesture betraying years of military training. This wasn't just a pampered prince, this was a warrior born to lead. Tell me about your life, Adrian said suddenly. Before all this, what was Elena Cortez's greatest dream? The question caught her off guard. I never really thought about dreams, just survival, mostly. Helping Papa with the forge, caring for Abuela, making sure we had enough food for winter. But surely you imagined something beyond San Miguel. Elena was quiet, searching for words to explain a restlessness she'd never fully acknowledged. Sometimes, when merchants came through with stories of the capital, of the great libraries and universities there, I wondered what it would be like to read books I'd never seen, to learn about places beyond our mountains. You can read. Adrian's tone carried surprise. Elena's cheeks warmed. Papa taught me. He said knowledge was the one thing no one could steal from you. She paused. I suppose that was naive. Not naive. True. Adrian's voice softened. When I reclaim my throne, you'll have access to every book in the royal library. I promise you that. The casual certainty in his voice. When I reclaim my throne, not if, sent something warm spiraling through Elena's chest. He spoke as though her future was already bound to his, as though the village girl who'd saved his life had somehow earned a permanent place in his restored kingdom. That's very generous, she said carefully. But I'm not sure a blacksmith's daughter belongs in a royal palace. Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Elena, you chose to save my life when it would have been safer to let me die. You lied to royal guards to protect me. You abandoned everything you knew to follow me into exile. His golden eyes held hers. If that doesn't qualify you for a place at court, then the court isn't worthy of you. Before Elena could respond, the sound of hunting horns echoed through the forest, distant but unmistakable. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. Tracking hounds, he said grimly. They've found our trail. Elena felt ice flood her veins. How long do we have? An hour, maybe less. Adrian was already scanning their surroundings. Military training taking over. The stream, we need to follow it downstream. Let the water hide our scent. They plunged into the icy mountain water, gasping at the cold but pressing forward with desperate urgency. Behind them, the baying of hounds grew steadily louder. Adrian, Elena panted as they struggled against the current. If they catch us, they won't. His voice carried absolute conviction. I didn't survive my brother's treachery just to die in these woods. And I won't let anything happen to you, Elena. I swear it. The promise hung between them as they fought their way upstream. Cold water swirling around their legs, and the sounds of pursuit growing ever closer. Elena realized with crystal clarity that somewhere in the space of 2 days, her fate had become inextricably tangled with that of this wounded prince. Whether they lived or died, triumphed or failed, they would do it together. The abandoned mill stood like a tombstone against the darkening sky. Elena and Adrian huddled in its shadow, shivering from their race through the mountain stream, while the distant sound of search parties echoed through the forest. They'd gained perhaps an hour by following the water, but the hunters were persistent. We can't stay here, Adrian whispered, though exhaustion carved deep lines around his eyes. The forced march had reopened his shoulder wound. Fresh blood seeped through Elena's careful bandages. You need rest, Elena insisted, pressing her hand against his forehead. His skin burned with fever, and those bandages need changing. If we don't stop now, you'll collapse and then we're both dead. Elena helped him sink down behind the mill's crumbling wall. Just a few minutes. Let me tend that wound. As she unwrapped the bloodied cloth, Adrian spoke through gritted teeth. There's something else you should know, about why Marcos wants me dead so desperately. Elena paused in her ministrations. Beyond the crown, the succession laws of Valdris require more than just royal blood to claim the throne legitimately. There are 3 sacred objects that must be present during the coronation ceremony: the crown of kings, the scepter of justice, and the seal of truth. Elena continued cleaning his wound, but she was listening intently. Marcos has them? He has the crown and scepter. They were in the royal treasury when he moved against me. Adrian winced as Elena applied fresh herbs. But the seal of truth, that was hidden by my father before his death. Only the rightful heir knows its location. Understanding dawned. That's why he can't simply declare you dead and move on. Without the seal, his coronation isn't legitimate in the eyes of the church or the ancient laws. Exactly. Every day I remain alive is another day his reign lacks divine sanction. Adrian met her eyes. I'm not just a threat to his power, Elena. I'm a walking challenge to everything he's built. Elena secured the fresh bandage with steady hands, though her mind raced. Where is the seal? Hidden beneath the altar in the chapel of St. Valdris, inside the royal crypt. My father showed me when I came of age, made me swear to protect it with my life. Adrian's smile held no warmth. Ironic, considering it may cost me exactly that. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the mill. Both of them froze, listening to the forest sounds too regular to be natural, too quiet to be animals. They're closing in, Adrian breathed. Elena helped him to his feet, slinging his arm over her shoulders. How far to this Blackwood castle? 2 days, if we can maintain our pace. Adrian gestured toward a narrow path leading deeper into the mountains. But Elena, I need you to understand something. If we're captured, we won't be. If we are, he continued firmly, You must tell them I forced you to come, that I threatened your family if you didn't help me. Do you understand? Elena stopped walking, anger flaring in her chest. Don't you dare. Elena, don't you dare treat me like some helpless child who stumbled into this by accident. Her voice carried a steel edge that surprised them both. I chose this path. I chose you, and I won't let you face whatever comes alone. Adrian stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You realize what you're saying? The penalty for treason is death. I know. Elena resumed walking, forcing him to keep pace. But the penalty for living without purpose is worse. They pushed deeper into the thornwood, as night fell around them like a shroud. The ancient trees seemed to press closer, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Elena had heard stories of this place, tales of travelers who entered and were never seen again, of creatures that hunted in the darkness between moonbeams. Stay close, Adrian murmured, as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of path. The thornwood has protections. Not all of them discriminate between friend and foe. As if summoned by his words, a low growl echoed from the shadows ahead. Elena's blood chilled as pairs of yellow eyes materialized among the trees. Wolf eyes, but too large, too intelligent for any natural creature. Shadow wolves, Adrian breathed, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword he no longer carried. The creatures emerged from the underbrush with fluid grace, 3 of them, each the size of a small horse, their dark fur seeming to absorb light itself. They moved with the coordinated precision of born hunters, cutting off escape routes with practiced efficiency. What do we do? Elena whispered. Don't run. Don't look directly at them. And whatever happens, Adrian stepped protectively in front of her. Stay behind me. The largest shadow wolf padded closer, its massive head tilted as though considering their worthiness as prey. Elena could see intelligence in those yellow eyes, ancient, alien, and utterly without mercy. Then something extraordinary happened. The creature's nostrils flared, catching their scent, and its aggressive posture shifted to something like recognition. The great beast lowered its head in what could only be described as a bow. Adrian sucked in a sharp breath. Impossible. What's happening? Elena whispered. They recognize royal blood, Adrian said wonderingly. My father told me stories, but I never believed. The shadow wolves were bound to the crown centuries ago, when the first king of Valdris saved their pack from extinction. The lead wolf approached with careful steps, touching its massive snout to Adrian's outstretched hand. A moment later, all 3 creatures had arranged themselves around the fugitive prince and his companion, not as predators, but as protectors. They'll guide us through the thornwood, Adrian explained, his voice filled with awe. And more importantly, they'll make sure Marcos's men never find our trail. Elena watched in amazement as the shadow wolves began to move, their dark forms flowing through the forest like living shadows. One remained at Adrian's side, supporting some of his weight when his injuries threatened to slow their pace. Another ranged ahead as a scout. The third followed behind, erasing their tracks with supernatural efficiency. How is this possible? Elena asked, as they traveled deeper into the mystical forest. Old magic, Adrian replied, older than the kingdom itself. The shadow wolves were here when my ancestors first crossed the mountains, when Valdris was nothing more than scattered tribes and feuding clans. He paused, running his fingers through the midnight fur of their guide. My bloodline has protected theirs for 1,000 years. Now they return the favor. They traveled through the night under the wolves' protection, covering ground that would have taken days under normal circumstances. The creatures seemed to know secret paths through the thornwood, routes that bypassed the worst of the forest's natural hazards and supernatural guardians. As dawn approached, the wolves led them to a hidden grove, where a natural spring bubbled up from moss-covered stones. The lead wolf nuzzled Adrian's hand once more, then stepped back with what Elena could have sworn was a regal nod. Thank you, old friend, Adrian said solemnly. May the hunt be good. The shadow wolves melted back into the forest as silently as they'd appeared, leaving behind only the sense that Elena and Adrian traveled under more powerful protection than any human army could provide. We're close now, Adrian said, settling beside the spring to rest. Blackwood Castle lies just beyond the next ridge. Elena knelt to refill their water skins, but her thoughts were troubled. Hey, Adrian, what if Lord Commander Blackwood refuses to help? What if he's already pledged loyalty to Marcos? Then we're dead, Adrian replied with brutal honesty. Dante Blackwood is the only man in the kingdom with the military might to challenge my brother directly. Without his support, he shrugged. We might as well turn ourselves in now and save everyone the trouble. Elena studied his profile in the growing light, noting the exhaustion that carved shadows beneath his golden eyes. No regrets. Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. If I die today, I'll have one regret, that I didn't tell you sooner how remarkable you are. Elena's breath caught. Adrian, you saved my life, Elena. Not just from my wounds, but from despair. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her heart race. Whatever happens at Blackwood Castle, I want you to know that these 3 days with you have been worth more than all the years I spent preparing to be king. Before Elena could respond, the sound of trumpets echoed across the valley. Not the hunting horns of their pursuers, but the ceremonial fanfare of a great castle greeting the dawn. Blackwood Castle lay before them, its massive towers carved from black stone that seemed to drink in the morning light. Banners flew from its battlements, not the royal colors of Valdres, but the silver wolf's head of House Blackwood. Our fate awaits, Adrian said, struggling to his feet. Elena rose beside him, her hand finding his with surprising naturalness. Together, he confirmed, squeezing her fingers. They began the final descent toward the castle, 2 small figures approaching a fortress that would determine not just their survival, but the future of an entire kingdom. Behind them, the Thornwood whispered secrets in a language older than memory. Ahead lay their greatest gamble yet. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached Blackwood Castle's imposing gates. The fortress rose from the mountain stone like something carved by titans. Black walls that seemed to absorb light, towers that pierced the sky like accusatory fingers. Guards in silver and black mail watched their approach with predatory stillness. "State your business," called the captain of the gate guard, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. Adrian stepped forward, and Elena saw him transform before her eyes. Despite his torn clothes and visible wounds, he carried himself with unmistakable royal authority. "Prince Adrian Valdres, rightful king of Valdres, requests audience with Lord Commander Blackwood." The effect was immediate. Guards straightened, hands snapped to sword hilts, and Elena heard at least 3 men draw steel. The captain's face went white as mountain snow. "Impossible," he breathed. "Prince Adrian is dead. We attended his funeral rites." "Reports of my death," Adrian said with grim humor, "were deliberately exaggerated." Elena watched the captain struggle, duty warring with disbelief, caution battling recognition. Finally, he seemed to see past the wounds and travel stains to the face beneath. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," he whispered, "it is you." Within minutes, they were escorted through gates that could have held off armies, across courtyards where armored knights trained with deadly precision, and into a great hall that managed to be both magnificent and forbidding. Weapons lined the walls, swords, axes, crossbows, all bearing the distinctive craftsmanship of master smiths. Lord Commander Dante Blackwood awaited them at the far end of the hall. Elena had heard descriptions of the legendary warrior, but seeing him in person still struck her speechless. Tall as Adrian but broader through the shoulders, with iron-gray hair and scars that spoke of a lifetime spent in battle. His dark eyes held the kind of cold intelligence that could calculate the cost of victory before the first sword was drawn. "Well," Blackwood said, his voice carrying the rasp of command, "this is either the most elaborate deception I've ever witnessed, or the dead have learned to walk." Adrian limped forward, Elena close beside him. "Hello, uncle." Elena started. She hadn't known of the family connection. But Blackwood's expression softened almost imperceptibly at the informal address. "Adrian." The name emerged like a prayer. "When we received word of your death, when I saw your brother weeping over your blooded cloak," Blackwood's jaw tightened, "I knew something was wrong. Marcos never wept for anything in his life." "He had reason to weep," Adrian replied grimly. His first attempt at fratricide had failed. Elena watched the interplay between uncle and nephew, noting how Blackwood's attention occasionally flicked to her with curious assessment. She felt desperately out of place in this hall of warriors and nobles. A village girl among legends. "Tell me everything," Blackwood commanded, settling into his carved chair. "Leave out nothing." Adrian recounted the story of his brother's betrayal, the poisoned blade, the fall from the cliff. Blackwood listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When Adrian finished, silence stretched through the great hall like a drawn bowstring. "You have proof of these accusations?" Blackwood asked finally. "Beyond my continued breathing." Adrian's smile held no warmth. "Not yet. But there was a witness that night, uncle. Someone else was in those woods." Blackwood leaned forward. "Who?" "I'm not certain, but I have suspicions." Adrian paused, glancing at Elena before continuing. "Captain Vega of the Royal Guard has been Marcos's creature since childhood. If anyone would be trusted to witness regicide." "Vega." Blackwood spat the name like a curse. "That snake would sell his own mother for advancement." He drummed scarred fingers against his chair's armrest. "But getting him to confess would require persuasion. He's unlikely to survive." "There's another way," Adrian said quietly. "The seal of truth." Elena saw Blackwood's eyes widen slightly. "Your father's final secret? Hidden where only the rightful king can retrieve it. With the seal, Marcos's coronation becomes illegitimate. The church would be forced to recognize my claim. And getting to the royal crypt would only require us to fight through several thousand of Marcus's soldiers, Blackwood observed dryly. A simple afternoon's entertainment. Not if we move carefully, Adrian countered. The festival of St. Valdres begins in 5 days. The entire court will be focused on the celebrations, parades, tournaments, feasts. Security around the chapel will be lighter than usual. Elena listened to their planning with growing unease. These men spoke of infiltrating the royal capital like they were discussing the weather, casual in their acceptance of astronomical risk. What about the woman? Blackwood asked suddenly, his gaze fixing on Elena with uncomfortable intensity. Who is she to you? Adrian's protective instinct flared visibly. Elena Cortez. She saved my life and chose to share my exile. She's under my protection. Is she now? Blackwood's tone carried subtle amusement. And what does Miss Cortez think of this plan to storm the royal crypt? All eyes turned to Elena. For a moment she felt paralyzed, a blacksmith's daughter being consulted on matters of state by legendary warriors. Then she remembered Adrian's words. Knowledge was the one thing no one could steal from you. I think, Elena said carefully, that even the best plan requires alternatives. What if the seal isn't where you expect? What if Marcos has discovered its location? What if... You're suggesting we need backup, Blackwood interrupted, and Elena caught approval in his voice. I'm suggesting that depending on a single solution to overthrow a usurper king might be... Blackwood laughed, a sound like steel on stone. She has a point, nephew. What other cards do we have to play? Adrian looked thoughtful. The northern lords have been quiet since my supposed death, Lords Hartwell and Ravencrest in particular. They supported my father's policies but haven't publicly endorsed Marcos. Cautious men, Blackwood agreed. They'd need proof of legitimacy before committing their armies. Then we give them proof they can't ignore, Elena said, surprise in her own voice at her boldness. Not just the seal, but Marcos himself. Both men stared at her. Explain, Blackwood commanded. Elena felt her cheeks warm but pressed on. Captain Vega witnessed the attempted murder. If we could capture him, force him to confess publicly during the festival. She shrugged. Nothing would discredit Marcos faster than his own man describing the regicide. Adrian's eyes lit up. A public confession during the festival of St. Valdres, combined with the discovery of the seal. Uncle, could we coordinate that kind of operation? Blackwood was quiet for long moments, his strategic mind clearly working through possibilities. Dangerous, he said finally. Extremely dangerous. We'd need to infiltrate the capital, capture Vega without alerting the entire guard, secure the seal from a heavily protected crypt, and orchestrate a public revelation during the kingdom's most watched celebration. He paused. It's insane enough that it might actually work. Elena felt a thrill of fear and excitement. 3 days ago, her greatest concern had been whether they'd have enough firewood for winter. Now she was helping plan the overthrow of a king. How many men can you spare, Uncle? Adrian asked. For this, everything. Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. I've been waiting 20 years for a war worth fighting. Your brother has given me one. As they began planning in earnest, Elena noticed how naturally Adrian commanded respect from hardened warriors. How his tactical mind worked through complex problems with the ease of long practice. This wasn't just a prince playing at leadership. This was a born king preparing to claim his throne. And somehow, impossibly, she had become part of that claiming. The night before their departure for the capital, Elena stood on Blackwood Castle's highest tower, looking out over the kingdom that might soon tear itself apart in civil war. The responsibility felt crushing. Lives hung in the balance, and part of their success would depend on a village girl who'd never been farther than market day. Having second thoughts? Adrian's voice came from behind her. Elena didn't turn around. Third and fourth thoughts, actually. He joined her at the battlements, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. It's not too late to change your mind. I could arrange for you to stay here, where it's safe. Safe, Elena repeated, tasting the word. 5 days ago, safe was all I wanted. Now, she finally looked at him, seeing starlight reflected in his golden eyes. Now I think I want something more. What do you want, Elena? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had dared voice. Elena thought of all the careful distance they'd maintained, all the unspoken feelings that had grown stronger with each shared danger. I want to see you wear your crown, she said quietly. I want to know that choosing to save you that night meant something. And I want, she hesitated, then found the courage to speak her heart. I want to discover what becomes of a blacksmith's daughter who falls in love with a king. Adrian went very still. Elena, I know it's impossible, she continued quickly. I know there are rules, expectations, political necessities. Elena. He caught her hands, his touch sending warmth racing through her. Do you think any of that matters to me? Before she could answer, he leaned down and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she'd stolen with village boys. This was desperate, hungry, full of all the emotions they'd been fighting since the moment she'd found him bleeding in the storm. Elena melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Elena," Adrian whispered against her forehead. "If we survive the next week, if I somehow manage to reclaim my throne." "When?" she corrected firmly. "When you reclaim your throne." His smile was brilliant in the starlight. "When I reclaim my throne, I want you beside me. Not as some forgotten mistress hidden away in shadows, but as my queen, my partner, my equal in all things that matter." Elena's heart stopped, then raced like a hummingbird's wings. "Adrian, you can't mean—" "I've never meant anything more in my life." His hands cupped her face with infinite gentleness. "Will you wear a crown, Elena Cortez? Will you help me rule this kingdom we're about to tear apart and rebuild?" Elena thought of all the reasons she should refuse: her common birth, her lack of education, the scandal it would cause among the nobility. Then she looked into Adrian's eyes and saw not just love, but absolute certainty. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to everything." Their second kiss was gentler, a promise sealed under starlight, while the kingdom slept unknowing below them. Tomorrow would bring the greatest gamble of their lives, infiltrating the capital, confronting a usurper king, and risking everything on a plan that could end in triumph or catastrophe. But tonight, on a castle tower above the world, a rightful king and his chosen queen claimed their first moment of pure happiness before plunging into the storm that would determine their fate. The festival of St. Valdres transformed the capital into a carnival of color and sound. Elena had never seen so many people in one place: nobles in silk and velvet, merchants hawking their wares, common folk dressed in their finest clothes, all celebrating the kingdom's patron saint with wine, music, and elaborate pageantry. Perfect chaos for their purposes. Elena adjusted the hood of her borrowed cloak, keeping her face shadowed as she moved through the crowd. Beside her, Adrian wore the clothes of a minor merchant, his royal bearing carefully masked beneath a performance of middle-class deference. Behind them, scattered through the festival crowds, Lord Commander Blackwood's hand-picked soldiers waited for their signals. "There," Adrian murmured, nodding toward a tavern called the Crown and Scepter. "Vega drinks there every festival night. Old tradition." Elena studied the building. 2 stories of weathered stone, with narrow windows that would make escape difficult and thick walls that would muffle sounds. "How do we get him alone?" "We don't. We get him drunk enough to be careless. Then my uncle's men create a distraction." Adrian's jaw tightened. "After that, it becomes a matter of persuasion." They entered the tavern's smoky interior, where off-duty soldiers and minor nobles celebrated with equal enthusiasm. Thalia spotted Captain Vega immediately. Scarred face, flushed with wine, regaling a table of younger guards with tales of his battlefield prowess. The sight of him made her skin crawl, remembering how those cold eyes had searched her cottage for signs of Adrian's presence. "Can you get close enough to drug his wine?" Adrian asked quietly. Elena nodded, patting the small pouch of sleeping herbs Blackwood's physician had provided. "Give me 10 minutes. She made her way across the crowded room, playing the part of a serving wench looking for work. When she reached Vega's table, she stumbled deliberately, catching herself against the captain's chair. "Clumsy girl," Vega snarled, wine sloshing from his cup. "Forgive me, sir," Elena gasped, reaching for a cloth to clean the spill. In the confusion, she managed to empty the herb pouch into his wine. "Let me refill that for you." Vega waved her away irritably, but not before draining the cup in a single swallow. Thalia retreated, heart pounding, and rejoined Adrian near the tavern's back exit. "It's done," she whispered. They waited. Within minutes, Vega's boasting became slurred, his gestures more exaggerated. When he finally excused himself to use the privy behind the tavern, Adrian's signal brought 4 of Blackwood's men converging on the building's rear entrance. Elena heard muffled sounds of struggle, quickly silenced. Then one of the soldiers appeared at the back door, nodding once before disappearing again. "Phase 1 complete," Adrian said grimly. "Now for the dangerous part." They slipped through the capital's winding streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where festival crowds made movement unpredictable. Elena's nerves stretched tighter with each step. Every shadow might hide one of Marcus's spies. Every face in the crowd could belong to someone who'd recognize Adrian despite his disguise. The chapel of St. Valdres stood at the heart of the royal complex, its ancient stones gleaming in the light of 1,000 torches. Festival decorations adorned its entrance, but Elena could see guards positioned at strategic points around the building. "The crypt entrance is around back," Adrian explained as they observed from the shadow of a nearby building. "There's usually only one guard during festivals. Everyone else is assigned to crowd control." "Usually?" Adrian's smile was grim. "We're about to find out if Marcos has changed his security protocols." They circled the chapel carefully, using festival noise to mask their movements. Sure enough, a single guard stood at the crypt's iron gate, looking bored and slightly drunk from festival wine. Adrian moved with the fluid silence of someone trained in more than just swordplay. Elena watched in fascination as he approached the guard from behind, one arm sliding around the man's throat in a chokehold that rendered him unconscious within seconds. Military training, Adrian explained quietly as he dragged the guard into deeper shadows. Father insisted I learn every aspect of warfare. The crypt door yielded to a key taken from the unconscious guard. Elena followed Adrian into darkness that seemed to swallow their small torch like hungry mouths. Ancient stone pressed around them, carved with symbols that predated the kingdom itself. The royal tombs are deeper, Adrian whispered, leading her down worn steps that disappeared into blackness. My father's resting place is at the very heart of the crypt. Elena tried not to think about the weight of stone above them, the darkness that could become their tomb if something went wrong. Instead, she focused on Adrian's steady presence ahead of her, the way he moved through this place of death with respectful familiarity. The royal burial chamber opened before them like a cathedral carved from living rock. Tombs lined the walls, centuries of kings and queens sleeping in marble silence. At the chamber's heart stood the most elaborate sarcophagus, topped with the carved likeness of Adrian's father. Here, Adrian said, kneeling beside the tomb's base. His fingers found hidden catches Elena couldn't see, pressing them in sequence until a section of the marble shifted aside. The seal of truth. Elena held the torch higher as Adrian reached into the hidden compartment. Her breath caught as he withdrew an object that seemed to capture and hold their flickering light. A disk of pure silver inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The seal of the first king, Adrian said reverently. Blessed by the founding priests, empowered by oaths of truth that have bound our bloodline for 1,000 years. He looked up at Elena, and in his eyes she saw the weight of destiny. With this, my claim becomes unassailable. Then let's make sure you get the chance to use it, Elena said practically. They retraced their steps through the crypt, Adrian carefully concealing the seal beneath his merchant's clothes. Outside, the festival continued in blissful ignorance while they hurried toward their rendezvous point, an abandoned warehouse where Blackwood's men waited with their captive. Elena's pulse quickened as they approached the building. So far, their plan had proceeded almost too smoothly. In her experience, life rarely granted such easy victories. Her instincts proved correct. It's too quiet, Adrian observed, as they reached the warehouse entrance. Elena nodded, noting the absence of sentries who should have been posted outside. Something's wrong. They entered carefully, weapons drawn, to find Lord Commander Blackwood standing calmly in the warehouse center. Beside him, Captain Vega knelt with hands bound behind his back, a gag silencing his protests. But surrounding them in a circle of steel stood 20 royal guards in full armor, their weapons trained on Adrian's uncle. At their head stood a figure Elena recognized with sick dread, King Marcos himself, resplendent in royal purple, wearing the crown that belonged to his brother. "Hello, Adrian," Marcos said pleasantly. "I've been waiting for you to come home." Elena felt the world tilt around her as armed guards emerged from every shadow, cutting off all escape routes. Beside her, Adrian's hand tightened on his sword hilt, though they both knew resistance would be suicide. "Surprised," Marcos continued conversationally. "You shouldn't be. Did you really think I wouldn't have spies watching my dear uncle's castle? I've known about your miraculous resurrection for days." "Then why not simply attack Blackwood Castle?" Adrian demanded. "Because I needed you to come to me. Specifically, I needed you to retrieve something from our father's tomb." Marcos's smile was sharp as a blade. "The seal of truth," Adrian handed over. Elena's heart sank. Their entire plan had been anticipated, manipulated, turned against them with surgical precision. "And if I refuse?" Adrian asked. "Then I'll start by killing your uncle, then your little peasant girlfriend, then every man who followed you here." Marcos's tone remained pleasant. "Eventually you'll give me the seal to stop the bloodshed. We both know your weakness for noble gestures." Elena saw Adrian's internal struggle, watched him weigh the cost of defiance against the lives of everyone who trusted him. She also saw the moment he made his decision. "Very well," Adrian said, reaching slowly into his coat. "You win, brother." But as his hand moved toward the hidden seal, Elena noticed something Marcos had missed. A slight gesture from Lord Commander Blackwood, barely visible but clearly meaningful to the soldiers who'd trained under him for years. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Blackwood's concealed men burst through the warehouse's upper windows, raining crossbow bolts down on the royal guards. More soldiers crashed through a hidden entrance Elena hadn't noticed, while the captive Vega revealed himself as one of Blackwood's agents in disguise, producing a hidden blade to cut down his nearest captors. In the chaos that followed, Elena found herself pressed against Adrian's back as steel rang against steel around them. This wasn't the careful infiltration they'd planned. This was warfare condensed into a single room, brutal and immediate. "The seal," Adrian shouted over the clash of weapons. "We have to." A crossbow bolt sprouted from the wall inches from Elena's head. She spun, seeing one of Marcos's guards taking aim for a second shot, and without thinking, she hurled her torch at his face. The man screamed, stumbling backward into his companions. In that moment of confusion, Adrian pressed the seal of truth into Elena's hands. "Get out of here," he commanded. "Find the festival crowds. Make the announcement public." "I won't leave you." "You have to." Adrian's sword deflected a strike aimed at her head. "The kingdom needs that seal more than it needs me." Elena clutched the ancient artifact, feeling its weight, not just physical, but symbolic. In her hands lay the power to legitimize or destroy a dynasty, to determine the fate of everyone in the kingdom. Around them, the battle raged with increasing violence. Bodies fell on both sides, blood slicked the warehouse floor, and she realized with growing horror that they were losing. Marcos's guards outnumbered them, and reinforcements were surely coming. Making a choice that would haunt her dreams, Elena turned and ran. Behind her, she heard Adrian's voice raised in the ancient war cry of House Valdris, heard steel ring as he fought to buy her the time she needed to escape. She didn't look back, didn't allow herself to think about what that choice might cost. The seal of truth burned against her palm as she burst from the warehouse into the festival night, carrying with her the power to crown a king and the terrible knowledge that she might already be too late to save the one who deserved to wear it. The festival crowd parted before Elena like water, her frantic energy cutting through the celebration's jovial atmosphere. Behind her, she could hear shouting from the warehouse, the clash of steel, and her heart hammered with the knowledge that Adrian was fighting for his life while she fled with the kingdom's most precious relic. But where could she go? How did one announce the overthrow of a king during a street festival? The answer came to her as she reached the capital's central square, where a massive platform had been erected for the evening's main event, the king's traditional address to his people during the festival of St. Valdris. Hundreds of citizens packed the square, waiting for Marcos to appear and deliver the ceremonial blessing that would conclude the celebration. Elena stared at the empty platform, understanding flooding through her. If she could reach that stage, if she could address the crowd with the seal in her hands. But first, she had to survive long enough to get there. "There, the woman," the shout came from behind her, and Elena turned to see royal guards pushing through the crowd, their armor gleaming in the torchlight. Someone had escaped the warehouse battle, had seen her flee with the seal. Elena plunged deeper into the festival crowd, using the press of bodies to evade her pursuers. But the guards were experienced hunters, trained to track fugitives through exactly this kind of chaos. They split up, circling around to cut off her escape routes. "Help me," Elena gasped, grabbing the arm of a nearby merchant. "Please, they're trying to." The man looked at her wild appearance, saw the guards approaching, and quickly melted away into the crowd. Others did the same, unwilling to involve themselves in whatever trouble she represented. Elena's heart sank. These people had no reason to trust her. No reason to risk themselves for a stranger being hunted by the king's own guard. Then a familiar voice cut through the noise. "This way." Elena spun to see a young woman about her own age, dressed in servant's clothes but with intelligence blazing in her dark eyes. Without hesitation, the stranger grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward a narrow alley between two buildings. "Who are you?" Elena panted as they ran. "Maria Santos. I work in the castle kitchens." The young woman's voice carried breathless determination. "And I know who you are. You're with Prince Adrian, aren't you?" Elena stumbled in shock. "How did you—" Word travels fast among servants. "We've been waiting for someone to challenge the usurper." Maria led her through a maze of back streets. Elena couldn't have navigated alone. "The real prince is alive, isn't he? That's what has everyone so terrified." "He's alive," Elena confirmed, hope flickering in her chest. "But he's in terrible danger. We have to—" "Get you to that platform," Maria finished. "I know, but not like this. They'll kill you before you speak a word." Maria pulled Elena into an abandoned building, then began stripping off her servant's dress. "Put this on, quickly." Elena obeyed, trading her merchant's cloak for Maria's simple brown wool. "What are you planning?" "You're going to be invisible," Maria explained, wrapping Elena's hair in a servant's cap. "Just another castle worker preparing for the king's speech. I know the routines, the signals. I can get you onto that platform." "Why would you risk this for a stranger?" Maria's expression hardened, just hardened. "Because Marcos killed my father, a palace guard who asked too many questions about Prince Adrian's death. They called it an accident, but—" she shrugged. "Some accidents are more convenient than others." Elena felt a chill of understanding. How many others had died for Marcos's convenience? How many families had suffered so a usurper could wear a stolen crown? "The seal," she said, showing Maria the silver disc. "With this, we can prove Adrian's legitimacy, but I need to display it publicly." where everyone can see. Maria nodded, studying the ancient artifact with reverence. During the king's speech, there's a moment when he raises the royal scepter for the crowd's blessing. If you could replace it with the seal, the symbolism would be unmistakable, Elena breathed. But how do we get close enough? Servants set up the ceremonial items before each speech. Wine, the scepter, ceremonial scrolls. Maria's smile turned predatory. Tonight you're going to help me with those preparations. They moved carefully through the capital's back streets, avoiding main thoroughfares where guards might still be searching. Elena marveled at Maria's knowledge of the city's hidden ways. Clearly the servant networks had their own methods of communication and movement. Here, Maria said, leading Elena to a service entrance behind the platform. Act confident, keep your head down, and follow my lead. Elena's heart pounded as they approached the guards at the entrance. Two men in royal livery, looking bored but alert. Evening, Maria, one of them said without much interest. New girl? Elena, started in the kitchens this week. Maria didn't slow her pace. We're running late with the ceremonial setup. The guards waved them through without further questions, and Elena released the breath she'd been holding. Within moments, she found herself on the massive platform where the king would address his people. The view from up there was staggering. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, torches creating a sea of flickering light that stretched to the square's edges. These people expected to see their king, to hear words of blessing and celebration. Instead, if Elena succeeded, they would witness the exposure of regicide and usurpation. The scepter goes there, Maria whispered, pointing to a small table draped in royal purple. When Marcos raises it for the blessing, every eye in the square focuses on that moment. Elena nodded, positioning herself near the ceremonial table while Maria arranged other items around the platform. When no one was looking, Elena carefully substituted the seal of truth for the royal scepter, her hands trembling with the magnitude of what she was attempting. Long live the king! The cry came from the crowd as trumpets announced Marcos's arrival. Elena's blood chilled as she saw the usurper ascending the platform steps, resplendent in royal purple, wearing Adrian's crown like it had always belonged to him. But it was the figure walking beside Marcos that made Elena's knees nearly buckle with relief. Adrian lived, battered, bloodied, his hands bound behind his back, but alive. Their eyes met across the platform, and she saw him recognize her disguise, saw hope flare in his golden gaze as he noticed her position near the ceremonial table. My people, Marcos addressed the crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the square. Tonight we celebrate not just St. Valdres but the strength and unity of our kingdom. The crowd cheered, unaware of the drama unfolding above them. Elena forced herself to remain still, to play the part of an invisible servant while her heart hammered against her ribs. Some would challenge the stability we have built together, Marcos continued, his hand falling on Adrian's shoulder in a gesture of false brotherhood. Some would spread lies and discord, claiming that the dead walk among us. Elena saw Adrian tense, understanding that Marcos intended to make this execution public, to use his brother's death as a final demonstration of power. But we know the truth. Marcos's voice rose to a crescendo. We know that our beloved Prince Adrian died a hero's death, and that his memory deserves better than to be profaned by pretenders and conspirators. The crowd roared approval, and Elena realized with growing horror that Marcos was about to murder Adrian in front of the entire kingdom, turning regicide into public spectacle. She had to act now. As Marcos reached for the ceremonial scepter, which was actually the seal of truth, Elena stepped forward with the confidence Maria had taught her to project. Your Majesty, she said clearly, allow me to present the sacred symbol for tonight's blessing. Marcos's eyes flicked to her without real interest. His attention focused on the crowd's energy. His hand closed around the seal of truth, and he raised it high above his head. The effect was immediate and devastating. The ancient seal blazed with silver light that seemed to come from within the metal itself, its sacred symbols glowing with power that had slumbered for generations. But more than the mystical display, it was the recognition that rippled through the crowd, whispers becoming shouts, shouts becoming roars. The seal of truth. Only the rightful king can wield it. Prince Adrian lives. Marcos stared at the artifact in his hand, understanding flooding his face as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. But it was too late. The crowd had seen, had witnessed him holding the seal that proclaimed another's legitimacy. Lies, Marcos shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos erupting below. This is a trick, a deception. Is it? Adrian's voice cut through the noise as he somehow freed his hands from their bonds. Then explain to your people why the seal responds to royal blood, brother. Explain why it blazes with light in your grasp, when legend says it remains cold for all but the true king. Elena watched in amazement as Adrian stepped forward, and something extraordinary happened. The seal's light dimmed in Marcos's grip, its silver radiance fading to dull metal, but when Adrian reached out to touch the ancient artifact, it blazed anew, its light visible across the entire square. The crowd's verdict was immediate and unanimous. King Adrian, King Adrian. Marcos's face contorted with rage as he realized his position had become untenable. In a last desperate gambit, he drew his sword, pointing it at Adrian's heart. "If I cannot rule legitimately," he snarled, "then I'll rule over ashes and corpses." But before he could strike, Elena moved. The lessons her father had taught her at the forge, quick reflexes, precise timing, the ability to work with dangerous tools, served her now as she snatched a ceremonial dagger from the table and drove it into Marcos's sword arm. The usurper king screamed, his blade clattering to the platform as blood flowed from the wound. Around them, Adrian's supporters revealed now that the tide had turned, overpowered the remaining royal guards. In the sudden silence that followed, Adrian picked up the seal of truth with steady hands. Its light pulsed like a heartbeat, like the very soul of the kingdom recognizing its true sovereign. "People of Valdris," Adrian said, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "I am Adrian, son of King Edmund, rightful heir to the throne that was stolen through treachery and attempted murder." He held the seal high. "Let this ancient symbol bear witness to the truth. I live, I claim what is mine by right, and I call upon you to stand with me in restoring justice to our realm." The square erupted in celebration that could be heard across the entire capital. "King Adrian, long live the king." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the kingdom choose its ruler. Around them, nobles and common folk alike knelt in acknowledgement of their true monarch's return. Adrian turned to her, his eyes bright with triumph and something deeper, love, gratitude, and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine, just days before. "Elena Cortez," he said formally, though his voice shook with emotion, "will you stand with me as I rebuild this kingdom we fought to save?" Elena looked out at the sea of faces, at the people who had chosen hope over fear, truth over comfortable lies. Then she looked at Adrian, no longer just the wounded stranger she'd saved in a storm, but the king who had trusted her with his life, his throne, and his heart. "Forever," she said simply. As dawn broke over the capital, painting the sky in shades of gold that matched Adrian's eyes, Elena stood beside the rightful king of Valdris and realized that sometimes the most extraordinary destinies began with the simplest choices. A village girl had chosen to save a wounded stranger. A kingdom had chosen its true king. And now together they would write the next chapter of a story that had begun with thunder and blood but would continue with love, justice, and the kind of hope that could transform not just lives but entire realms. The coronation of King Adrian I took place 3 months after the festival of St. Valdris, in a ceremony that broke with tradition in almost every conceivable way. Instead of the closed court affair typical of royal coronations, Adrian opened the cathedral doors to common citizens, filling the ancient space with voices that had never before been permitted to witness the making of a king. Elena stood at his side, no longer disguised as a servant but wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that transformed her into someone worthy of standing beside royalty. Yet for all the finery, she remained fundamentally herself, the blacksmith's daughter who had risked everything for a wounded stranger. "People of Valdris," Adrian declared as the archbishop placed the crown upon his head, "I accept this throne not as a birthright to be hoarded, but as a responsibility to be shared. The kingdom belongs to all who call it home, from the highest noble to the humblest farmer." The crowd's roar of approval echoed off the cathedral's stone walls, and Elena felt her heart swell with pride for this man who had chosen to transform his restoration into a revolution. After the ceremony, as celebration spilled into the streets, Adrian drew Elena aside to a quiet alcove in the palace. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing the question she'd posed to him days earlier in the Thornwood. Elena looked at her hands, no longer calloused from forge work, but soft from palace life, then at the man who had become king through courage and determination rather than simple inheritance. "Just one," she said softly. Adrian's face showed concern. "Tell me." "I regret that it took a storm and your near death for us to find each other." Elena smiled, seeing relief flood his features. "Everything else has been worth it. The danger, the fear, even leaving my old life behind. Because this," she gestured between them, encompassing not just their love but their shared purpose. "This was worth any price." Adrian pulled her close, and Elena marveled at how natural it felt to be held by a king. How easily her heart had adapted to loving someone whose decisions affected thousands. "Queen Elena," he murmured against her hair. "It has a lovely sound, don't you think?" Elena laughed, remembering the terrified village girl who had pressed bloodied cloth to a stranger's wounds. "I still think there must be some mistake. Queens are supposed to be born to it, trained from birth." "Queens," Adrian interrupted firmly, "are supposed to be brave enough to do what's right, even when it costs them everything they've known. They're supposed to see possibility where others see only problems, hope where others see only despair." He pulled back to meet her eyes. "By that definition, I've never met anyone more qualified for the position." Through the alcove's window, Elena could see the kingdom they now ruled together, a realm still healing from the wounds of usurpation and civil strife, but growing stronger each day under Adrian's just leadership. There would be challenges ahead, political intrigues to navigate, enemies to face, but they would meet those trials as they had met everything else together. "Your Majesties." Lord Commander Blackwood appeared in the doorway, though his scarred face carried something suspiciously resembling a smile. "The people are calling for you." Something about a first dance. Elena felt her cheeks warm. Royal protocol demanded that the new king and queen open the coronation ball with a formal dance, performed before the entire court. It was one tradition she hadn't quite adjusted to. "I don't know the steps," she whispered to Adrian as they made their way toward the great hall. "Neither do I," he admitted with a grin. "We'll improvise." And so they did. As the court musicians struck up a waltz, King Adrian and Queen Elena took the floor with more enthusiasm than expertise, their laughter echoing through the great hall as they stumbled through steps neither had been taught. But if their technique was imperfect, their joy was unmistakable. The assembled nobles watched this unconventional royal couple with expressions ranging from scandalized to enchanted, gradually realizing that this was what their kingdom had been missing. Not just competent leadership, but leaders who remembered what it meant to be human. Elena caught sight of Maria Santos among the crowd, now elevated to head of household staff, beaming with pride at the woman she'd helped save. Near her stood Captain Vega, the real Vega this time, freed from Marcos's dungeons and restored to his proper position, his scarred face showing the first genuine smile in years. Even Abuela Carmen had made the journey from San Miguel, despite her age, to see her granddaughter crowned queen. Elena had worried the old woman might feel out of place in the palace, but watching her now, holding court among fascinated nobles with stories of Elena's childhood, those concerns seemed foolish. "Happy?" Adrian asked, as they spun across the dance floor, oblivious to the watching crowd. Elena considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, happiness had been simple things: a successful market day, Mateo's health, enough food for winter. Now it encompassed concepts she'd never dared imagine: justice restored, a kingdom healing, a love that had somehow survived impossible odds. "Beyond measure," she said, meaning it completely. As the dance ended, Adrian drew her close for a kiss that sealed not just their marriage but their commitment to the future they would build together. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Elena realized that for the first time in years, the kingdom rang with genuine celebration rather than hollow ceremony. Later, as the festivities continued around them, Elena and Adrian slipped away to the palace balcony where they'd first confessed their love. The capital spread below them, lit by thousands of candles and torches, while music drifted up from celebrations in every quarter. "Do you ever wonder," Elena asked, "what would have happened if I hadn't found you that night? If I'd simply closed the shutters and pretended I heard nothing?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think," he said finally, "I would have died in that storm. Marcos would have ruled unopposed, the kingdom would have suffered under his tyranny, and you would have lived a safe, small life in San Miguel, never knowing what you were capable of achieving. No regrets about that alternative." "None whatsoever." Adrian's arm tightened around her waist. "Because all of this is better than safe." Elena leaned into his warmth, watching their kingdom celebrate below. In the distance, she could see the mountains that surrounded San Miguel, could almost imagine the cottage where her journey had begun. That life felt like something from a story now, remembered but no longer real. "Your Majesties." A young page appeared in the doorway, bowing nervously. "Forgive the interruption, but there are delegations arriving from the neighboring kingdoms. They wish to formally recognize your reign." Adrian sighed, duty calling as it always did, but before he could step away, Elena caught his hand. "One more moment," she requested. "Just us, before we become king and queen again." Adrian nodded, understanding perfectly. For just a few seconds more, they were simply Adrian and Elena, two people who had found each other in a storm and chosen to face everything that followed together. Then they straightened their shoulders, adjusted their crowns, and walked back into the light to meet whatever challenges awaited. Behind them, the kingdom they had fought to save continued its celebration, secure in the knowledge that their rulers understood both the weight of authority and the joy of being truly, deeply human. The story that had begun with a village girl and a wounded stranger had become legend, but for Elena and Adrian, it was simply the opening chapter of the life they would write together. A life where love conquered politics, where courage triumphed over convenience, and where the most extraordinary destinies could begin with the simplest choice to help someone in need. As they entered the great hall to greet their guests, Elena caught sight of their reflection in the polished marble, a king and queen who had earned their crowns not through birth or marriage, but through the kind of loyalty, sacrifice, and love that transformed not just individual lives, but entire kingdoms. And in that reflection she saw the truth that would guide their reign. The greatest power was not the authority to rule, but the wisdom to serve, and the greatest crown was not made of gold and jewels, but of trust freely given and faithfully kept. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and shadowed with responsibility. But Elena faced it without fear. After all, she had chosen to save a wounded stranger in a storm, and that choice had led her here to a throne, to a kingdom, to a love that had proven stronger than betrayal, deeper than duty, and more enduring than any crown. The rest, as they say, was history in the making.